I'm very pleased to be interviewing Henry Shafer, who's EVP of Marketing Evaluations, Inc. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Charlene.
So let's talk a little bit about your background. How did you get to where you are today?
Okay, long story. Started out way back in the early 70s, consumer market research. Got my experience as a neophyte doing all kinds of different consumer brands, ranging from Volvo to now defunct TWA Airlines. Worked on the San Francisco Bay Area Rapid Transit System, helped them set that up. And that kind of really paved the way for me to find a career in research. During that time, I actually went back to graduate school and got my social psychology degree in master's in that area, and which eventually took me into the world of the advertising agencies. Spent some time at J. Walter Thompson. From there, moved on to a company called MPI, Motivational Programmers, Inc., where I had the opportunity to work with Emmanuel Demby, the founder of Psychographics. And that kind of fit nicely with my previous experience in social psychology degree, and in fact brought me to the ABC television network from there. Back in the mid-70s, if you recall, the television networks were being extremely criticized for their sex and violence, especially in how it was affecting the children. So they were interested in starting up a social research unit, which I was hired for. Got swooned by some executives over there and went over there, and actually brought a whole group into the television research world, studying the effects of television on children and how their parents were dealing with it. One thing led to another. I eventually got into more mainstream research. Ended up heading up the whole network research department by the time I left in the late 80s, and was enticed by the Q-Scores company. We were a big client of theirs, and I formed a nice relationship with some of the people there, and went over into an executive position, and have been there for the past 22 years.
So Henry, you've been in the industry for quite a while, and I'm wondering how you see the landscape, the media landscape, evolving since you first started in the industry.
Well, it's evolved tremendously, obviously going from a 3-network marketplace with a handful of major magazines and national newspapers to a burgeoning environment of all kinds of platforms that people now have access to, ranging from DVRs to the internet, iPads, iPhones, all kinds of other smartphones. I mean, it's become a much more complicated landscape to monitor. So in turn, that's created a much more stressful burden on the back of researchers to figure out how to best monitor this changing and more complex fractionated landscape. So to that end, we've tried to address and update all of our services to meet those needs. And the beauty of what we do is we end up measuring the bottom line of viewer response, regardless of how they're exposed to the different platforms out there in the landscape. What we're assessing is the emotional investment the viewer is making in the product, in the brand, in the character, in the property, in the personality, in the show. So our way of dealing with this more complicated landscape hasn't changed much, other than introducing some new metrics.
So looking ahead, can you give me some predictions over the next few years about the media industry?
Yeah, I think the media industry in particular, because of the way it's becoming so complicated to monitor, the current basis of sale, which is ratings, I think is eventually going to slip away. There's going to have to be some kind of methodology, which I hope is more in line with what we do, that assesses attitudes as the basis of, the involvement, the emotional commitment. That is becoming, at least from what we're seeing, a much more important factor for not only programmers but for media buyers to make more informed, more intelligent decisions as to what shows and networks to place their clients' advertising in. Because the ratings and audiences are becoming so small that it's hard to determine future media planning into getting the biggest bang for your buck. So I think more emphasis is going to be placed on the ways to measure emotional involvement. And that's where we're heading, and that's what we think the future is going to be for media. And interestingly enough, it's becoming a much more potent issue for regular consumer research, brand research. Again, that's a fragmenting universe as well, where brands are trying to figure out the best place to promote their product online, through Facebook, through Google, YouTube, Twitter. If they ever get into the advertising business, it's going to create havoc for what's the best way to reach a target consumer. In the end, the best assessment is always going to be the emotional and connection that you're making with your consumer, your television viewer, and that will somehow, I believe, be the way the future of media and consumer research is going to head, and create those metrics that help you make that assessment. And follow the viewership, follow the sales at the stores, follow the advertising dollars placed against a network or a program, with the knowledge of what is driving that viewer, that consumer. And I think that's where we're heading. That's my prediction.
That's great. Thank you.